Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Ben from the PB and Gainz podcast, and you're listening to episode 11. In this episode, David and I chatted with Steph Gaudreau, creator of the blog Stupid Easy Paleo, host of the podcast Harder to Kill Radio, an author, a beekeeper, and quite frankly, one of the great voices out there trying to help people become better versions of themselves through food, training, and a positive mindset. If you don't believe anything I just said, go check out her Periscope videos, her blog, her Twitter feed, and I guarantee you, you will find something that will apply to you and make your life better. So, we're going to get into the podcast, but first, the quote. Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. And that's from Seneca. So, without further ado, here's Steph.
And here we go.
It's peanut butter jelly time. Peanut butter jelly time. Peanut butter jelly.
Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Ben from the PB and Gainz podcast.
This is David. What's up?
And we are talking today with Steph Gaudreau. She is the creator of Stupid Easy Paleo, which has been one of the inspirations of why we're getting into the podcasting industry, as well as just from a fitness standpoint. Refer a ton of clients over to her page, especially for those paleo Chick-fil-A nuggets, which are a personal favorite of mine and my family. She is the author of the Performance Paleo Cookbook and host of the Harder to Kill Radio podcast, which is a great listen to, which I would recommend all of our people to go check out. And so that is Steph. I'll let you introduce yourself in the way that you feel comfortable and you feel best describes you. So go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. People always ask me, what do you do? And I always struggle a little bit to make it concise because I do so many different things. But I'm a former high school science teacher. I was a veteran 12-year teacher who decided to pursue my interest and passion for healthier living. And so on my website, I do a bunch of different things. I create recipes and write books and coach people. I'm also a weightlifting coach, and an athlete. So I spend a lot of time in the gym. And I've got a lot of other interests like food photography and stuff like that. So I do a lot of different things. I wear a lot of different hats, but somehow it all kind of comes together under the umbrella of helping people optimize their lifestyle, healthy lifestyle.
Dig it. That's a good way to put it. You wear those hats well because as everything comes through with the photos and the Periscope videos, I mean, you do a pretty good job, and we're really thrilled to be speaking with you today. So thank you again.
Yeah, no problem.
So we want to start off because obviously Stupid Easy Paleo is the name that you started with, and we wanted to kind of get that idea of what does paleo mean to you, because that dogma of it is so spread out and there's such a wide spectrum. So we wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so, when I started eating paleo, and when I first heard about paleo, it was 2009. So just kind of like take yourself back 6 years and think about where this movement was, and it was really in such an infancy. And the way a lot of people defined it was by a very strict set of guidelines, and so it's like you can never eat white potatoes, and you can never try to have any kind of dairy, and, just like a lot of really strict eliminate this and eliminate that. And, I guess maybe I was a bit more adventurous than some other people, so I decided I'd give it a try despite all of these different guidelines and rules. But I think, when you look at paleo now as a movement, now it's been 6 years later, things are a lot different. And I think for the better and for the worse. And because we don't have, the dogma is still there, but we also have a really super loose interpretation of what it means. And so that leaves a lot of consumers really confused about what paleo is. So for me, it's following a way of eating that is based on eliminating and knowing what foods work for you and what don't. So for one of the things I recommend people do is to do a 30-day elimination. Take out those foods that are kind of known irritants. They're known to be inflammatory. Some people have issues with, some people don't. But to give yourself a fair chance at kind of knowing what works for your body and what doesn't. And then from there, kind of reintroducing the stuff that works and going from there. But ultimately it's trying to eat food that's as unprocessed as possible, staying away from junk food, and just kind of basing your plate on healthy proteins, veggies, some fruit, and some good fats, and keeping it really simple. And I think that's where people get a little bit led astray. They're like, oh man, I need to buy all these special flours for baking, and all these special sweeteners and coconut sugar and this and that and coconut aminos, and like, well, those things are nice. I call them nice to haves. They're not need to haves.
That's huge. Yeah, I think that's definitely a way people get thrown off. We lost her. You there?
Cutting out a little bit.
Just cut out there on me.
We gotcha.
You're back now.
All right, we're back. Awesome, cool. Good old recording. Oh yeah, you were saying like it's definitely the nice to have versus the need to have, and I think that goes back to obviously the name Stupid Easy rings a bell there, and it definitely has merit.
Yeah, a lot of people get really turned off by paleo because they find it's really expensive. And when I ask what they're eating, they're like, oh, I had to buy all this special stuff. And, when you look at those nice to haves, they're not usually the most nutrient dense foods either. So people are spending a lot of money on things that are just not the most nutritious stuff they could be eating. And I get it. While it's nice to have a treat now and then and, not be super rigid and strict and get down that path of perfect eating, it's also a realization that, where you spend your money it has to be more than just calories that count, right? It's got to be micronutrition and what's really in that food. And if you kind of look at where people are spending a lot of dollars, it's on foods that they're just not really nutrient dense. So when the kind of objection comes my way that like paleo is way too expensive, and I ask people what are they putting in their cart on a regular basis, it's like if we see meats and eggs and veggies and fruit and some healthy fats and that's still unaffordable, that's a completely different scenario than like I needed to make chocolate bacon brownies every other night, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think to that term, I was at I won't say the name of the place, a bulk store yesterday with my wife, and we were shopping, and you definitely can see where people spend a ton of money on those bonus foods, and when you look at the meats and the quality of the meat, you look at like, oh, I'm going to spend this much for a pound of ground beef. Is that really in my best interest? Versus I could have this sweet, chocolatey, healthy treat, and then that's all your money.
Right.
And so you mentioned the idea of paleo and what it meant to you, and I'm going to take that a little bit step further. Is I've known that you have been an advocate of the sustainability versus abs movement.
Yeah. And
you've taken it even to the point to where you're into beekeeping. How's that going?
Beekeeping is super fun. And actually the sustainability is greater than abs movement. That's kind of a Diana Rogers Diana Rogers, Rob Wolf sort of thing. They're two of the people in this community that are really taking up the torch for looking at sustainability in food production and what we can do to make that objection that people have of like, well, meat is unsustainable, so how could you eat paleo? How could you advocate for that? They're two of the folks who are really bringing this to the forefront in our community. So I first have to give them huge kudos for doing that, because it takes a lot of guts to stand up and advocate for that stuff when it's not always the most popular topic. And so actually I learned about beekeeping from Diana and her book Homegrown Paleo, and she kind of put a little feeler out there earlier, I would say probably in December or January actually of this past year, and asked, is anybody interested in keeping bees? And I thought, yeah, I am. So I hit her up and sent her a message, and here we are. We've got a hive right next to our house here in pretty urban San Diego. We live just outside of downtown, and urban beekeeping for the win here. But it's been really amazing. People always ask, oh, are you trying to sell your honey? And like, do you want the flow hive and all this other stuff? And it makes me nuts. But to us, it's more or less doing what we can with our living situation and where we're at. We don't live on a farm, so what can we do to contribute? And we built a little planter in front of our house, a little 4x6 planter, and put some veggies in there this year, and have our bees on the side of the house. And it's all about just kind of doing what you can with the situation that you have. And so that's really what inspired me to do beekeeping. And it's not, it's not as intensive as other animal rearing might be, and having a farm and animal husbandry and all this stuff. But it's an amazing process. And I have a huge appreciation now for what these amazing little creatures do for us, and for the environment, and for our own food supply, kind of passively, of course. They're not like, oh, let's go out and pollinate all these food crops, but they have such an important role in everything in ecology. And I wish we could get some more folks out there who are interested in bees and will take up that hobby, because it's really fun.
Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, meeting people where they're at and getting them to just do something is huge. We went to 2 acres, and we're trying the whole chicken thing. And you talk about intensive. They're very high-maintenance creatures. It's too cold. It's too rainy. It's too, everything. And so it's a potluck on whether or not you're going to get any eggs or not that day. So I understand what you mean. And it definitely does bring a brand new appreciation to farming and then the animals that are involved in the whole process.
Yeah, my sister actually has chickens, so I commend her for that. She does pretty well with them, but yeah, you're right. They're a little bit sensitive to what their needs are.
Definitely. Do you have any tips that you'd like to pass along for anybody who feels like they can't? I mean, you've hopped into beekeeping in an urban city. Do you have any tips for somebody who might want to do something similar?
Well, for beekeeping, this is really the time to start doing your research, because if you're going to get a new hive, or you're going to go out and buy a nucleus, a lot of people call it a nuke. It's a nucleus colony. It's basically a mini hive. Or you can get a package of bees, which is basically just a box with some bees in it. Most of the places you're going to get those either packaged bees or a nuke from are going to do that in the spring. So you can't get bees really this time of year unless you know somebody who's trying to get rid of a hive. Like, it's just, this is not the time you'd get started, but it is really the time you want to do some research and figure out what kind of hive you want, where you're going to get your bees. Are you going to have to go far to get them? We're lucky here in Southern California. We had a supplier not too far up the road from us, and so in April we got our bees, but you have to reserve them very early. So I would say if people are interested for 2016 and getting bees in the spring, to start researching that stuff now, and do a lot of reading, watch some videos, get in touch with anyone in your area who might be doing beekeeping, because a lot of people end up kind of taking on a mentor, and I've actually done that. We have a beekeeping store that's about a mile from the house, and the gal is just fantastic, and she's helped me so much. And it's really kind of a craft, right? Like, the more kind of hands-on help you can get ahead of time and have somebody to answer questions for you, the better. But there are also some really good resources online that people can find and look for associations in their area.
That's definitely good advice. And you mentioned the mentor aspect of it all, which is a huge reason as to why we requested to talk with you, because you've been in the food space, cooking space, for, like you said, a while. And it's definitely something with our clientele that they feel like cooking and food can be so overwhelming. And so taking this opportunity to be that mentor, that teacher, like you mentioned earlier, and kind of get into that aspect of what is it that is you think is holding people back the most when it comes to eating well?
I think there's a couple things. I think the first is not being 100% convinced that eating better is going to make them feel better. And I know that seems really obvious to those of us that are doing it now. And we're like, oh yeah, better food choices make a huge impact on how we feel. But if we kind of, the standard American diet as a whole, and how people are getting food and fast food and that sort of thing, I think people are just like, well, I'm going to go for the low-hanging fruit. I'm just going to eat how I'm going to eat, and I'm going to solve my problems by going to the doctor and getting a prescription. So if they're not feeling well. So, I think a lot of it is just understanding and education around the fact that what you put in your mouth really does matter, and it can make a huge difference. So there's that piece of it. you're right, like the whole idea of cooking and being in the kitchen and how do I chop this thing and how do I make a meal. Components of a meal come together at roughly the same time, so my meat isn't cold while my veggies are still cooking. There's a lot of strategy that goes into that, and a lot of us who are comfortable with that learn how to do it when we were young. We were in the kitchen with our moms and grandmas, or we had to cook for family members. A lot of people, when they were growing up, had the responsibility of, like, it's your job to put the meals on the table for whatever reason, like their parents were working. And so a lot of people, I think, they're just like, again, those of us that are comfortable with it are like, oh yeah, duh, that's how you chop an onion. Like, it's so easy. But a lot of people didn't grow up with that, and they don't have that. And so it can be really overwhelming and really stressful to just approach healthier eating, because that generally means that you're going to be eating out less and cooking at your home more. And so it's like all of a sudden there's a huge barrier where it's really scary, and people are like, oh, I have to shop and then prep it and then cook it and then I have to do it all again the next day. It never stops. And so it's trying to give people those strategies to make it less scary and to give them the tools and the resources to try it. And I think once people get into the habit and they try it and they've realized it doesn't have to be scary, and when they're eating better, they feel better, they start to buy in. But it's more or less getting over that first hurdle of like, okay, this is what we're going to do and how you're going to do it, and now you have to do it. And it's just trying to get folks to take that chance.
Yeah, you just took the word right out of my mouth. I was going to say, for that first hurdle, it can be really daunting for a lot of our clients. Now, as a person who talks about food, who writes about food, and someone who cooks food all the time, what do you do when you just don't feel like cooking? Like, what are your go-tos?
We have a little restaurant down the street from us that we go to quite a bit. But, we try to cook mostly at home. So, although I will say, when I was doing my cookbook last year, it was a constant stream of food, like cooking constantly. I was going to the grocery store 2 or 3 times a day sometimes, and the people there thought I was crazy because they're like, you're just here. And there were times there, like I do remember I ordered Pete's Paleo. Pete and his wife are based here in San Diego. I'm friends with them. And I just was like, I give up. I'm so tired of cooking and looking at food and cooking it and going to the store. And I don't even want to eat anything that I'm making. So I have had those times where I've ordered, a meal service like Pete's Paleo, just because I know those guys and what they're doing is really delicious, and it saved me from going crazy. Yeah. But a lot of times I'll reach into the freezer and pull something out and just kind of make something really simple. And I think that's what saves me is I don't try to do stuff that's complicated. For me, it's going to be a protein and some veggies on the side and throw on whatever fat is lying around and go from there. Keep it really basic.
Yeah, the more basic and the more barriers you remove by any type of prep work, whether it's using that crock pot to have something to freeze later that you can reach into, or like I said, if you can find a good meal delivery service or somebody that makes good quality stuff, go do that.
Sure.
It's I'm sure you've heard it a ton of times with your clients. It's like, well, I just don't know. I can't eat right. I'm too busy. Too busy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The slow cooker. If you don't have a slow cooker, you guys need to get on board with that, because it's the ultimate in hands-off cooking. Oh, yeah. There's really not much you can do short of buying your food pre-made or hiring somebody to be in your kitchen and make it for you. Like, there's really no other way to make it simpler.
That's 100% dead-ass accurate. No other way to put it than that.
Yeah.
What is when it comes to that crock pot slow cooker, do you have a favorite recipe for that?
My husband is into video games, and he is a huge fan of a game called Skyrim, and it's kind of like a medieval adventure game, basically. And in Skyrim, they have something called a home-cooked meal, and if you get a home-cooked meal, like you replenish your stamina and your whatever, right? So it's a good thing if you get a home cooked meal. And so I've kind of come up with a simple template of what I call a home cooked meal. And it's just like a couple pounds of chopped up whatever stew meat, or dice up some pork, or dice up some lamb. You throw that in there. You chop up a bunch of root veggies, carrots, parsnips, squash, onion. You put that all in there. Just fill it up. You don't even have to measure it. Just fill it. Potatoes, like whatever floats your boat, and then some rosemary or thyme or some salt and pepper. My secret ingredient is whole grain mustard, so I'll put that in there because it adds a little background of flavor. And then some broth. Fill it up halfway or so, maybe a little bit more than that, and then just put the lid on 5 or 6 hours on low, and you've got a home cooked meal. And he always gets really excited when I'm making home cooked meal. It's like, yes. It's just so simple. It's like a simple stew. It's great for winter. It fills you up. It's warming, and you can freeze the leftovers, which is great for a lot of people. They can just reach into the freezer and defrost that on a weeknight.
Yeah, I know that it's pretty hard to mess up recipes with the crock pot, but have there ever been any failures that you've had? Because we know that's one thing that holds back some of our clients, is they're honestly afraid to fail cooking.
Yeah, I used to be a teacher, as I said earlier, and one of the ways I got around, yeah, you're right, like fear of failure is a huge barrier to action. And so the way I used to deal with it with my students was I would ask them, okay, so I'd ask them the answer to a question, and they'd sit there and stare at me like, I think I know, but I don't want to get it wrong. And so I'd say, well, if you had to make a guess, right, because a guess is a lower pressure situation. You're just guessing, right? Like, it's okay to get it wrong if you're guessing. And it's amazing the difference there. So, I just kind of encourage people to experiment and see what happens. But for me, gosh, I can think of a couple times where I've let something go way too long, and I forgot that it was, because you pass that initial stage with a slow cooker where, you come into the house if you've been out of the house and you're like, oh, it smells amazing in here. Oh, that's right, I have something in the slow cooker. And you pass that point where your nose actually gets, you kind of get desensitized to the smell. And so I've had times where I've just left something on, stay warm for like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I've done. I've had maybe once or twice where I forgot to actually turn it on. So it happens, but generally, like you said, it's pretty hard to screw it up. You just take a chance, just try it. If you get it wrong, oh well, like, so what?
Yeah,
it goes in the dog food bowl, that sort of stuff.
Good reason to have a dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there you go. We've all been there to where we screwed up some type of recipe. I know for sure I've done the whole leave it off, the crock pot off, and come back and be like, why does it not smell like I really wanted it to when I walked in the house?
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so when it comes down to that, it's like, you have to just definitely say, just give it a try, overcome whatever that fear is, make sure that you're doing something, and just making the attempt, because you get lost in that process of it all in spite of the goal.
Yeah.
So you forget to turn on a crock pot. Big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Your wife will forgive you. And so we'll kind of transition over into the weightlifting aspect of it. You said you're definitely an athlete. Watching your Instagram videos, remember the breakdowns of some of your Olympic lifts were pretty cool to watch, because not a lot of people get into that specific detail there. And so for some of us that do like to lift, that was beneficial. What do you say from that failure standpoint in the weight room? Do you think it's the same thing, just lifting some heavy shit?
For people that come from an athletic background, I think, if you've always been in sports or you've always been a competitive athlete, there's a level of, if you've been doing it for a long time, that failure is part of it. Like, you can't always just be on an upward trajectory. Like, Yeah, you'd like to see slow growth over time, and certainly after you've been doing a sport for a while, you get over the beginner gains, right? You get over that sweet period where it's like every time you go into the gym, you have a 5-pound PR, if you remember those days. So I think if you've been doing sports for a long time, you know ups and downs are part of the game. So it's a little bit easier to accept it sometimes. And I think for new people, one of the things that again can be disappointing is when those gains start to slow down, or they push too hard. I see it sometimes with athletes in our gym, especially the younger folks, and I can say that I'm almost 37, and we have a lot of like 20, 21-year-olds, and they're wonderful. They're so motivated, and they get super strong really fast. But one of our athletes the other night, I was asking him about, he was saying, I'm having a hard time keeping my elbows up in my front squat. I think my wrists are not flexible enough. So we had a little bit of a talk about what it takes to actually keep your elbows up in a front squat. And I asked him, do you do any foam rolling? And he's like, I don't know what that is. Right? So we had to talk about, okay, in weightlifting, we generally have 3 movements. We have squatting, pressing, and pulling. That's basically it. And if you're going to be working those movement patterns over and over and over, and also at the same time getting very strong very quickly because you're super young, you recover really fast, you respond to volume training pretty well, the limiting factor there for a lot of people is their connective tissue. And, their ligaments, their tendons, their fascia. And keeping that healthy is really important. So we had a really long discussion about how to keep that stuff healthy, how to foam roll, how to do mobility. And I think if we can get folks who are newer to understand that, like, you've got to take care of yourself, because they'll come in the gym, the younger folks will come in the gym, and they'll put down their bag, they'll put on their shoes, they'll go touch a bar, and they'll start like lifting weight. That's their warm up. They're like, I warmed up with 45 kilos. They don't do any warm up, and so I think it's really important for new folks to not have that utter disappointment of, I got injured really early because I wasn't taking care of myself. And I think that's really important for folks to kind of think about. So, failure, injury, disappointment, like having to retool your technique and, essentially take 2 steps back to then take 1 step forward. That's all part of the game the longer you stay in it. And you do see like my coach, the guy who co-owns our gym, has been lifting for 30 years. And he's still doing it. And he's just, if you're going to stick with something long enough, you have to accept that there are going to be successes, there are going to be failures, there will be injuries probably. Hopefully not, but that stuff does happen. And you have to be tenacious enough to keep coming back and then try to fix those mistakes if you're going to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah, with the increase of popularity of CrossFit and showing the games on TV, a lot of the younger people just see the people performing it, but they don't see all the recovery that has to go in as part of it, and that's really important. A lot of people want to train like an athlete, but then they're not taking the time to recover like an athlete. I mean, some of the people that do it professionally, they're able to take the whole day and do the foam rolling and the recovery and the rest. But a lot of these younger people aren't doing that.
Yeah, it's really a whole package, right? I mean, and you get to a certain level, and most people know that nutrition matters on some level. They don't all eat the exact same, but they know that what they put into their body food-wise matters. They know their sleep matters. And there's you look at elite athletes and you see their performances, but you don't see the sacrifices that they make, whether it's relationships or social time or, like I said, injuries and something's constantly sore or something's constantly on the verge of blowing up. They don't, I'm not saying every elite athlete goes through that, but there's a huge amount of sacrifice that a lot of people don't see that goes on behind the scenes. And so to try to get to that level, you have to be willing to make those sacrifices.
Yeah,
and if you want to just do it recreationally because you love it and because it's fun, there's nothing wrong with that too. But
Yeah, and that kind of builds into the idea of, I don't know if you're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk, but he talks about overnight success. I mean, it's everybody wants to be that overnight success, but they don't put in that work or the time. So just like you said, and building off that idea, I heard your podcast with Sean Stevenson, and when you described the diamond description of health and kind of how those all reflect off each other, could you touch on that? Because that was probably the best way I've heard it put.
Yeah, and I would be completely honest, I stole that idea from my husband. He's the ideas guy. He'll constantly walk around and he's like, I had an idea. But anyway, so we were talking about this idea of, if you Google like a health pyramid or wellness pyramid or whatever, you see a very two-dimensional thing where there's a hierarchy. Right. On the bottom, there's whatever, nutrition, maybe sleep, which I think is more important in some cases. But, you'll see nutrition, you see something on the foundation. And then above that, there's something, think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like as you go up the pyramid, those things diminish in their area. And as we would think, their importance. So whatever's at the top is less important than what's at the bottom. But this idea of, it being three-dimensional and having facets, I think realistic.
Hello?
And that's how a lot of people approach it, and I totally understand that that's how, you have to get started somehow, and I respect that, and for a lot of people, I call it food is the gateway, right? So food is the gateway to get people in the door. But it's not the only thing that matters, and over time, if we can get people invested enough, when you consider optimal health, it's like a multifaceted three-dimensional kind of approach, right? Where we know that food isn't the only thing, exercise isn't the only thing. Like it becomes pretty complex. And I'm not saying that how much you focus on these things has to be exactly equal. But if you eventually want to build that optimal health, that amazing sort of lifestyle that's supporting your wellness, it has to be several factors feeding into that. It can't just be one thing. And most of us kind of naturally find that progression. We're like, okay, we kind of have a handle on our food now. Wow, that was really overwhelming to try to change our diet. We get it. We're in a groove. We know what works. We're doing well. Maybe at that point, if you get comfortable, it's time to start investigating another facet. Maybe you're not really doing any exercise. And a lot of people don't do that at first. They focus on weight loss through dietary management, and that's totally fine. But at some level, it's like, okay, let's start talking about movement and how to incorporate healthy movement every day. Or maybe like, oh yeah, I'm only sleeping 5 hours a night. How can I address that? And so you start to add in those different facets and start to get a more complete picture of what it takes to build optimal wellness.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it, because I said most people I know with our clients, I'm sure yours as well, they get caught up in that one facet and they want to go crazy with that one. Like, I'm going to work out 15 hours a day and then I'll get my six-pack. But yeah, there's so much that goes into it. So I really love that diamond description. That's a really good way to put it.
That was a good idea from your husband.
Yeah.
I try to tell my wife every day that that's all I'm full of is good ideas. So I'm sure he tells you that too.
Well, we work together pretty well as a team because he generates a lot of ideas and I can just put my nose down and work, So he's maybe the muse, and I just get it all done. So
there you go. Partnerships, that's what it's about.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to go ahead and start wrapping this bad boy up because I know you're busy. And I also know in your podcast, you like to have this quick question round with everybody at the very end.
Yeah, the gauntlet.
Exactly. We want to throw you through our own gauntlet.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
All right, so I'll let David hit you with that first question.
Okay.
Best food place you've lived at, like city?
Oh, San Diego, for sure.
Nice.
So many healthy options here.
Oh, yeah. My cousin lived there, and that's all he talks about.
Yeah.
Favorite cut of meat you like to cook with?
Give me a ribeye steak. I'm good.
Favorite cooking tool?
Vitamix.
Vitamix is good. What's your favorite book?
Oh, wow. I'll tell you the one that had the biggest impact on me lately, and so I have many favorites, but probably the one that lately that I've read that I was like, this makes so much sense, is The Talent Code.
It's a good book.
Yeah, not a new book, but one that I didn't pick up until recently, and it made a big impact on me.
Favorite recipe? And you can't say your tortilla one.
I'll tell you a funny story about that recipe in a minute, but my favorite recipe... Gosh, these questions are hard. I like myself like a good frittata, and I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I think that's such a versatile meal. And you can really, like once you know the pattern, you can kind of replicate it any way you want. And there's one on my site, it's like a spinach beef frittata. And I feel like if you're going to start your day with that, then you're doing something right, because it's going to fill you up and it's got lots of protein, so it'll be good to go.
That's a good one. And then here's the last question. Your podcast is Harder to Kill. What does that mean to you?
I think developing mental resilience is really important. And so often we talk about physicality as being, the kind of the marker of like resiliency, whether it's sports, like you can handle this training, or you can handle this volume, we just increased it, or you're of an optimal body composition, or like you're in a disease-free state. And I think so many times we focus on the physical as a marker of being more robust and resilient, but that mental aspect of being able to focus on what's important, and there's that famous quote, not my circus, not my monkeys, where it's like, if you focus on everyone else's crap all the time, and let that drag you down, then it's going to be really hard to make whatever progress you want to make. Mindset is really important. And so starting to cultivate those mental aspects of resilience, I think for a lot of people is something that they struggle with. But I also think that's very, very important in having a more well-rounded kind of, being harder to kill nature. Because so much of what we deal with is mental. And it really does make a huge difference.
Yeah, life is a mental game that everyone has to play.
It totally is.
So our last question, we ask this for all of our people that we come on, is if we had one gain that you would like people to take away from our conversation, what would that be?
I always say this, but keep it super simple. And it sounds like such a corny thing, and like, oh yeah, I know, keep it simple. But really, simplification and in a way minimal, like being more minimal in what you do and your approach, I think is a really good lesson to have. So taking it back to basics, not trying to be overly complicated and getting bogged down in the details of, say, nutrition or fitness. We have this tendency, especially since nutrition and fitness are becoming so open source and the internet is so making information so readily available, people get really bogged down in the analysis paralysis, right? They're like, oh, when I ate this many grams of this and I should eat that many grams of that. And it's like, whoa. Like a lot of people are really focusing on such minutia that they're missing the big picture. And so I would say, keep it simple, focus on the big stuff. I always find it kind of interesting when people are like, well, I've been tracking my carb intake, down to the grams, and I'm trying to tinker with it and play around with it because I'm trying to lose body fat. And then I'm like, right, but how many hours a night are you sleeping? And they're like, I don't know, 5 or 6. And you're like, what? Yeah. We can see it because it's obvious to us that, again, there's that multifaceted approach. But we get so bogged down in the details sometimes that we either create too much stress around that thing, which is hindering our progress, or we just miss these other giant, like, flashing signs
that are there because we're so, we've got our blinders on. So, for what it's worth, the internet and social media and all that stuff are great because access to information has never been easier, but it also allows people to chase down these tiny little rabbit holes that are not really serving them well. So I would just say, keep things basic, keep things simple, take the big view, and chill out and enjoy life. It's got to be fun.
It does.
Right?
Except for those damn carbs. Jeez.
I know, right? If we could only solve that, we'd all be billionaires.
Exactly. Well, I think that's a perfect way to end that. And so definitely keep it simple, keep it stupid easy, and enjoy it, because if you're not enjoying it, what's the point?
Yeah, and that's the other thing I see too is again, folks get really stressed out. They're like, I'm trying to optimize this, and I'm trying to be perfect with that, and I'm trying to do this and trying to do that, and it's almost like a frenzy.
Yep.
They're super stressed. There's that that energy is kind of draining and negative, and it's like, well, why are you trying to make all these changes and optimize your health? It's so you can enjoy life and not get super caught up in all that other stuff. So keep it all in perspective.
Exactly. There's enough stuff going on to not freak out over these complex issues and just go back to the basics.
Totally.
So you talked about there's a ton of information out there. How can our listeners find information from you?
My website, stupideasypaleo.com, is probably the hub for everything at this point. And I'm generally anywhere on social media that you can type in Stupid Easy Paleo. YouTube, Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. No Snapchat. I don't have Snapchat. People keep asking me, do you have Snapchat? Periscope. Yes, I have Periscope. So, yeah, generally if you go anywhere on your social media platforms and type in Stupid Easy Paleo, you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking that time. I know we kind of bounced around some topics. There's so much to cover with you. So we do thank you for your time.
No problem. It's fun.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good rest of the day.
You too.
And that was episode 11. So thank you guys for listening to the PB and Gainz podcast. As you can probably tell, a little bit nervous walking through that one with her. She kind of bounced all over the place, audio cut out. So it's one of those oh God, what do we do? But luckily, Steph stayed constant, and she brought some great knowledge to keep us grounded and to help you guys out in the meantime. So check her out, stupideasypaleo.com, and then just Google Stupid Easy Paleo and watch everything else pop up. You can find us at PB and Gainz, or more importantly, at Avenue Fit, AVENU fit.com for more information, blogs, all that good stuff, videos we put out there. It said, if you could please give us a rating and review on iTunes. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Tunein Radio, or Spreaker, however you're listening. Pass it along to a friend. Said those shares, reviews, and ratings really mean a ton to us, and it helps us improve the podcast every single week. So we are here to help you, and we'll just love that feedback and help from you guys in return. So in turn, we will see you next week with our episode 12. We're pretty excited about it. So I will see you then. Have a good week, guys.